Hi all, welcome to this, the third video in our series looking at population geography. In today's video we're going to be looking at demographic data gathering. So how do we actually go out and gather population data? Now, how we do it in the UK, we've got a couple of different versions that we can use. So we've got civil registration, and that is where you get registered by government agencies, it can be local or national government, and they take a register of your birth, so you get issued with a birth certificate. Deaths, you get issued with a death certificate. Marriages, again, a marriage certificate. And adoption, where a certificate of adoption would be recorded. Now, these things are all important for the government to record because it helps them plan public expenditure. So if you look at births, if they see an increase in births over a particular year, they know that a number of years down the line, they would need to increase spending on education because they'll have more young people going through schools. They know they need to be able to provide a more robust paediatric care system because they'll have more young people who may need medical care. Deaths equally know that can have an impact on the number of people who may or may not be going through the pension programme. It also means that they'll know if there are particular areas where a lot of people are dying, they might need to then increase spending on particular areas of medical research, or they might need to look at tightening up legislation for particular workplaces to make them more safe. Marriages, they want a record of because once you're married, you're much more likely to begin a family, to start having children. And as such, again, that increase in education spending is going to become relevant. That increase in paediatric care is going to become relevant. The adoption one just is more about a shifting of resources. Because if somebody is in the care of the state, so they need to be adopted, the government has to allocate resources to raising that person. If they then move into the care of a family, then the government can look at how much resources they need to allocate to the adoption system. Now, the next one we've got the census and we've got the mini census. Now, for the kind of most part, we're going to focus on the census. Now, the census is a huge, in-depth information on every single person that lives in the country. Because it's so in-depth and so expansive, it only happens every 10 years. And it happens on years ending in a 1. So the next census is due to go out in 2021. You get many censuses that can go out more frequently than that, but they then only sample the total population. They don't go out to everybody. Now, when we look at these different methods of gathering data, there are issues with them. So civil registration, the biggest issue, it doesn't account for any migration in a nation, in or out. So yes, it keeps a tab on how many people are being born and how many people are dying, but that's not the only thing that can influence population change. If people move into the country or move out, they change their population, they change the population structure, and civil registration does not account for that. Mini census, it doesn't have a big sample size. If you've done any work with statistics, or if you go on to do any work with statistics, one of the big things that you'll be taught, that you'll always be told, is the bigger your sample size is, the better. It removes the kind of possibility for just odd errors to creep in if you've got a small sample size. Censuses, there's a lot of different issues, and this is where the kind of thing you would be asked to discuss in an exam setting. So to put up some of the kind of areas that we've got issues with the census, and I'll talk through some of these, and this is going to be the big thing that we'll work on expanding notes on in class. Big issue with census, cost. It is hideously expensive to carry out a census. Now, not only do you need to pay for the printing of all of the actual forms, you then need to train up people to potentially go out and deliver them to people. Some of the issues cross over, but if you've got issues with a very poor literacy rate in your country, you're going to need to have enumerators that will go out and talk people through the census and copy down what answers they get given. That can be hugely expensive. I've just talked about literacy there. If you don't have a very high rate of literacy in your country, that can be a big problem because how do people fill in the form? If they can't write, they can't fill in the form. If they don't have a very good reading comprehension, they don't understand what the form wants them to do. So again, then that calls back onto increased cost. Another thing that can hugely increase cost is if your nation is very multilingual. If you've got a lot of different spoken languages, even if you've got a lot of different spoken dialects of the one language, that then means that that form that you printed out in one language now has to be translated into dozens, potentially, of different languages that again increases the cost. And you then also have the logistical issues of making sure the correct form in terms of language gets to the correct people in terms of readership. Population distribution can be tricky if you've got people who live very, very spread out over a large area. Again, logistically, that's challenging to get to them all. If you've got dozens of villages spread over, in a huge area like the steppe in Russia, getting to all of these people can be challenging. If you've got an area where you've got a lot of war, it's, going and carrying out a census may not be your biggest priority at that moment. Equally, if an area there's a lot of political tension, people might not want to fill out the census honestly. And it's something that does become very prominent if a particular minority group feels they're being discriminated against. People may not want to claim they are members of that group in order to avoid discrimination. So the data you get back is inaccurate. Boils into the next point of lack of trust in the government. If you don't trust what that information is for, you may not fill the form in at all, or you may fill it in dishonestly. And if you do these things again, you need to ask, what was the point of doing this really expensive exercise if the data that you gather back isn't accurate? If you get poor communications, it comes back to logistics. It just makes it very challenging to physically get the forms to people. If you don't have a good road network, if you don't have a good rail network, whatever. If you've got villages that, if you look at areas in sub-Saharan Africa where you get to villages by walking, you don't drive there because there's no road network. That's challenging. That makes the census more expensive. It makes the census less likely to be carried out. If you look at areas with very hostile terrain, so if you look at, for instance, Nepal in the middle of the Himalayas, it's very difficult to get around because of the mountains. You look at Brazil in terms of the depths of the Amazon, it's very difficult to get to these people because of the nature of the land that you're trying to operate in. If you've got a lot of migration, either in or out, that happens in a very rapid way, that can make censuses, one, challenging to do because it's difficult to actually get these people to sit down and talk because they're moving. And two, it means that the data can go out of date very, very quickly. Remember, censuses are done on a decade scale, every 10 years. So if you've got a large rate of change, that can make the census exercise useless because the data has went out of date. Lies, damn lies and statistics. People lie. People lie for lots of different reasons. As say, we've had some of the stuff earlier about lack of trust in the government, of what the information will be used for, if they feel they're going to be discriminated against. People lie on censuses. It happens. And again, the drum I've been banging for the last couple of minutes, it means that the information is less likely to be accurate. If you've got illegal immigrants, they are not going to fill in the form. They are there illegally, thus they're not going to tell you that they're there illegally. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. It's just this idea that they will then mean that they are still living in your country, they're still there, but you don't know about them, and you can't then apply provision to meet their needs because you don't know that they're there. Mistakes, a simple one. People make mistakes in the form. Census forms can be complicated, and if people make errors on them on a big scale, then that can cause huge problems, and the mistakes can come from the other end. If a question is worded poorly in a census, the quality of the data back you get will suffer. And last but by no means least, if you've got part of your population that's nomadic, as in their entire way of life revolves around shifting from place to place, as is still very common in areas in the world like the Sahara, for instance, it means that you've got groups of people who may not be counted at all because they get missed, or can be counted more than once because they get counted in one village that they're staying at, they move on to somewhere else, and they get counted again in the second or third or fourth village that they stay in. So again, it makes the data inaccurate, and it makes the data less valuable. Now, this has been a reasonably quick run through of how we gather demographic data and some of the issues with gathering demographic data. This is some of the stuff that can appear as an exam question. We'll discuss it a wee bit more in class. But we'll wrap this up here, and I'll speak to you guys next time. Bye.